Good afternoon. We're ready to start our afternoon meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners, and we are going to jump into item 12A, which is our discussion of the introduction to the county's 2020 Community Wildlife Protection Plan. And with us to discuss this is Keir Miller, and he has a number of people with him that he'll be introducing. I just want to mention that Commissioner Farr is on the telephone, and so he's present, and Commissioners Buck, Bozovich, and Sorensen are present. We expect Commissioner Burney momentarily. So if you could, Keir, introduce your colleagues at the table and make your presentation.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Chair Sorensen. Good afternoon, Commissioners. With me today to help co-present this topic is Alex Ramlow. He's the Fire Protection Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Forestry Western Lane Office. Also is with us is Rachel Surslev. She's planner with the Land Management Division. In addition, we have, of course, Patience Winningham, the county's new emergency manager, who's also part of the project steering committee. And we have Michael Curran, the unit forester for East Lane Fire District, part of with the Oregon Department of Forestry, and also Justin Patton, who's the fire planning coordinator for the Eastern Lane Department of Forestry. So I want to thank them all for being here in support of this plan. So we're happy to be here with you today to discuss what we think is a very important topic, a very timely topic, given some of the recent wildfire trends in the West and in Oregon, and especially in light of the recent campfires down in California, which are still in our recent memory. I know it's been very snowy out and very rainy, but it is a good time to start thinking about wildfire prevention and preparedness right now. Wildfire season will be upon us before we know it. In addition to the timing of, the increase in wildfire in the last few years, this project, the timing is good because it's a bit synergistic with the board's recent direction to the Land Management Division to report back, which we will be doing next week, on some updates, potential updates to our fire protection siting standards. So this discussion, the way we view this is that this core group of experts in this field can help inform that discussion. And I do know that it'll be beneficial for that work if we can get some input through this process, which we will be, as you'll hear about in a moment here, we will be engaging the community through this process. So this is a good framework. If we want to consider changes like that to the code, this could fit in well with that. So just real quickly, Rachel and I are going to give you just a quick background on this, what a Community Wildfire Protection Plan is. And I promise the only acronym I'll try to use today is CWPP, Community Wildfire Protection Plan. It's kind of a mouthful. I'll try to keep the jargon limited to that term only. So Rachel and I will be presenting some background on the CWPP, talking about the process, the history of this work. And then for the bulk of the presentation, we're going to turn it over to Alex, and I think he's going to be presenting what the board's probably most interested in, and that's sort of an update on some of the wildfire trends that we're seeing, and along with that, an introduction to some of the costs and issues involved with responding to wildfire, some of the impacts of wildfire, and then most importantly, we'll talk about some of the benefits of an update to the county's Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We'll end it with a discussion on next steps, and we'll have plenty of time for questions from the board. So just real quickly, what is this thing? What's a Community Wildfire Protection Plan? And it's basically, it's a tool, it's a documented plan for protecting a community from wildfire. The plan identifies wildfire threats in and around a community. It defines what needs to be done to mitigate these threats, and it proposes an action plan to identify next steps and work on this. What's important to note is that it's really a collaborative effort. Wildfire is one of those hazards that really requires a cross-disciplinary approach. It involves not just the traditional wildfire responders, the wildland fire responders, or the fire districts. It also involves emergency managers, land use planners, elected officials, and of course the public has a shared responsibility in this, in dealing with this issue. So one of the real benefits of a wildfire protection plan is it does bring this collaborative group together. There has been some history of protecting communities from wildfire and developing wildfire plans as part of all hazard mitigation plans. But it wasn't really until the early 2000s there was a series of major wildfires around the West. Folks will probably recall the Biscuit Fire down in the Kalmiopsis Wilderness, Siskiyou National Forest. That was one of the largest wildfires in history in Oregon. As part of that intense wildfire season, there was some national legislation passed, the Healthy Forest Restoration Act of 2004. Title I of that act establishes a process for developing these community wildfire protection plans. Lane County was one of the first jurisdictions, second county in Oregon to develop the wildfire protection plan. That is the plan that's currently on the books. There was a small update to that plan made in 2008, but as you can see, our plan, it's been a long time since it's been comprehensively updated, so there really is a need to work on this plan to update it, and we'll talk a little bit about that process. This really is a good time to do it. There's been a lot of new science. There's been a lot of good information that can help inform our risk assessment, our understanding of the threats in the county. So that's why this is coming to you, to the board at this time. This is really a plan that's intended to be a living, breathing document. Like any planning process, we feel that the effort itself to develop and update this plan has value in and of itself, and that it brings these groups together. It generates buzz in the community. It's a good opportunity to engage the community about this important issue. So that is why we are bringing this plan to you. I want to turn it over to Rachel, and she's going to talk a little bit about what are the components of a wildfire protection plan in the process.
Hi, Commissioners. So elements of a CWPP, firstly, this is a plan that's held jointly between Lane County, the Oregon Department of Forestry, and the Lane County Fire Defense Board. So it's really a collaborative plan that multiple agencies are involved in when developing. Second, the plan is mainly focused on wildfire mitigation strategies, such as fuel reduction programs in order to reduce the risk of wildfire to life and property and infrastructure. Also, a specific update or focus of this plan will be the update to the risk assessment. So there's some new data out there on wildfires that will be updating the existing risk assessment with that new data. And lastly, the plan focuses on providing measures for wildfire reduction to homeowners and communities. And one of the ways that that's accomplished is with our FireWise program. That's an ongoing program that we have right now. It's an incentive program for building homes and structures to reduce their susceptibility to wildfire. And provide incentive for homeowners to do that. So that's something that we are doing and we continue to do and will be incorporated into the new CWPP. And so we have a general outline here of what the process will be for updating the plan. We first starting with the convening of the steering committee. And like I said, it's a collaborative plan, so we're getting together the different agencies that are going to be involved. Can you go to the next one?
Sure.
And so our project steering committee is made up of, like I said, Oregon Department of Forestry, and we're represented by the Eastern and Western Lane districts. We've got the Lane Fire Defense Board, in which we're represented by Terry Nye. Then we've got State Fire Marshal's Office, Lane County Emergency Management, and Lane County Land Management. So looking at our next steps here as we get going through the update, we've convened our steering committee and had a number of meetings so far to kind of bring this introduction to you and get the plan started. We're going to work to evaluate the existing plan, and part of that evaluation will be updating the community outreach portions of the plan, as well as refining that risk assessment, as I had mentioned earlier. So those are two things that we'll be focusing on updating And they're really going to inform the outcomes of the CWPP, which are the updated action items and the pilot projects that might come out of this plan. And so last steps there we see are finalizing the Lane County CWPP. So that's getting it written and updated, and we'll be bringing it back to you for possible adoption once we are done.
And just real quick, one of the things we will talk about in the next steps is we'll look for some direction from the board and how they'd like to be kept apprised of this process as it moves on. Alex is going to talk about the timelines with the plan if the board's interested in periodic check-ins, or if you'd like us to just come back once we've been through the public engagement process or at the very end of the plan. So that's some direction we'll be seeking from the board today. And I think now we're going to turn it over to Alex.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for your time today and your attention to wildfire prevention and this important community planning tool, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. So today I'd like to hit on 3 topics. We're going to touch on wildfire trends in the state and here locally. We're going to look at the funding structure to respond to those wildfires within the state and locally. And then we'll review some benefits of a CWPP, which is, again, that Community Wildfire Protection Plan. Okay. So with those 3 topics, I'm going to just ask to hit one point from each of those. And so the first point for wildfire trends that I really want to get across is that wildfires are going to play an increasingly important role in community planning and policy. And I'm going to give you some data to kind of back that up in terms of where we're going trend-wise in the West. So what we're looking at here is a progression of the Camp Fire, and that was the one that impacted the town of Paradise, California this last Thanksgiving. On the left there, you have some indicators of the conditions leading up to that event. But what you see in blue is that fire's progression within 24 hours. So this fire, you know, every place has, any place where a fire moves across the landscape naturally has what we call fire window. And that window is really where catastrophic fires have the right conditions to occur. Everyone thinks about California and they say, well, you know, California's got it bad with these wildfires. And I think recently, through my public education in the community, I think we're beginning to see some of that awareness increase, that although California has it worse, we do have a real risk here in Oregon. When you have 65-mile-an-hour winds behind a wildfire, it moves pretty quick. In blue here is the 24-hour progression. That's moving at about 100 yards per second. So for these large catastrophic fire events, response becomes a smaller tool, and it's really more about evacuation and planning. The other thing that I'd like to point out, and this is something we look for here in Lane County, is we keep a very close eye on relative humidity. So relative humidity has a big part to play in how active a fire can get early on. And so our goal as the Oregon Department of Forestry and other wildfire prevention agencies or protection agencies is to catch those fires and keep them small. But within that window of extreme fire events, that's where you have the likelihood that those fires escape initial attack and become large events like this. This graph here, if you look, is the ERC. This is the energy release component. This is predominantly based on fuel moisture. If you look at our 10-year average, prior to 2007, we had an average of 29 days of our fire window. So that's the window where extreme fire behavior could occur, is 29 days. And 29 days when you're protecting an area with a couple engines and it's spanning thousands of acres, that's a long time. If you look at the next 10-year gap, we've increased that to 44 days. So here in Lane County, our fire window is increasing. some data to back up that our fire window is increasing. So our 10-year historic average for the Oregon Department of Forestry in responding to fires was 35 million. 4 of the last 6 years were over $80 million. And that's an indication that that window is getting larger. Our historic fire season in Oregon was about 3 months. It usually starts around the end of June and goes through September. If you look at the last 10-year average, that increased to 4 months. And if you look at last year, we had a 5-month fire season. So our risk is expanding on the landscape in terms of the amount of time we spend in that dangerous extreme fire weather conditions. Lane County experienced 45% more fire starts last year, or I'm sorry, in 2017 than it did in its historic 10-year average. And one of those fires, the Jones Complex, that was the one that was up by Mackenzie Bridge, led to 30 unhealthy air quality days for the city of Eugene, Springfield, and surrounding communities. There's been a lot of research on what this leads to, and one of them came out of Southern California. They found that the average cost per person per smoke-induced day was $9.54 per person. And that had things to do with increased calls for respiratory illnesses, so an increased response for first responders. It had things to do like reduced activities. Last year, they canceled Ashland's Shakespeare Festival, which is their largest event per year due to smoke. So these are the type of external costs that you can have associated with wildfire. For the cost of wildfire, the take home that I really want you to have is everyone pays, but local communities truly do have the lion's share of that cost. This next graph, or this next figure, displays that. So everything in orange there is what you incur in short-term expenses from a wildfire. In orange is what something like a FEMA disaster relief might cover, short-term expenses. 65% of the true damages from a wildfire are long-term. And these are usually things that the community ends up incurring whether it knows it or not. So to briefly look at who pays here in Lane County, the Oregon Department of Forestry, both Eastern Lane and Western Lane combined, has an annual minimum operating budget for fire protection of around $5 million. 50% of that comes from a forest assessment fee that is charged to private landowners within the county, specifically forest landowners. The other 50% comes from the state general fund. We also have approximately $1 million in soft funding that comes through this county. The reason we have $1 million coming into the county for prevention is because we have a 2005 CWPP. And without updating that CWPP, we risk losing those prevention dollars. So that $5 million that I just said is our minimum annual and minimum operating cost catches 95% of the fires on the landscape. So 95% of the fires that start in a given season, we as ODF and other fire response agencies, we catch those. Below that first blue line is the base $50 million for Lane County, $5 million, that's our share of that. Everything above that first blue line is what's spent for those remaining 5% of fires. So even though we catch 95% of the fires on the landscape, the remaining 5% are really where the majority of the costs and acres burned come from. So a couple really good uses for the CWPP. Soft funding often requires that a community has a plan in place. These plans identify and prioritize future actions, so when we get that soft funding, we're able to prioritize it for the areas of the highest need. It has a great long-term return on investment, and it is really the only tool to mitigate extreme fire events like the one we saw in Paradise this last year. All right, so the take home for the CWPP, or really any disaster mitigation, it's a lot like brushing your teeth. We spend a little bit every day, every year on prevention activities. We're going to reduce the total cost of those wildfires going into the future. It's a long-term planning tool, and it's one that really does have, there's a lot of science out there. I'd be more than happy to share whatever you would like in terms of information on that. So effective community mitigation programs have 3 things in common. They involve the community, they have outside grant funding strategies, and they institutionalize mitigation programs. What we're really looking at doing with this 2020 CWPP is institutionalizing it as a mitigation program in the county. On the right, you'll see some tools of common CWPPs. And my commitment to you guys is everything that we put in this CWPP is going to be low-hanging, established science actions. So with this CWPP, we're not looking at, reinventing the wheel. We're looking at what's been proven, what's done out there to reduce the total cost of wildfires on a community. Some of these things include codes and regulations. So matching, for example, your access codes and standards to match that of the fire response is a big deal. In order to get our fire trucks up into certain areas in Lane County, it's difficult to do that, and with some of the grades that are currently out there, it's problematic. So we can only send up a smaller engine, something like that. So these are the types of things that we're going to be reviewing when we come up with this 2020 CWPP. CWPPs do not regulate, they do not secure funding, and they do not guarantee implementation. It really is a guiding document. Some possible outcomes that we see from the CWPP are an incorporation of wildfire hazards into the comprehensive plan, expansion of building codes and regulations where appropriate, and opportunities in prevention and outreach. For now, all we're asking you to consider is to continue to support Lane County's involvement in the CWPP update process and use that resulting document to inform your policy and budget decisions. Thank you very much for your time. These are our proposed next steps, which we were more than happy to take your input on. We're currently in the 2006 plan review, and we've initiated public outreach through the Oregon State University Extension Service. Fall of 2019, we hope to have our risk maps updated. Kira had mentioned that there's new data available out there, and so we're really looking at forward and including those into this 2020 plan. The goal is to submit this and have it ready for adoption summer of 2020. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Really appreciate this presentation. And I think what I'd like to do is maybe kick this discussion off and then call on the other commissioners for some of their comments. And I'll just start with the risk maps segment of all this. Obviously, people all over the community want to know what their risk is for being a victim of a wildfire out of control, much like our friends in Northern California wanted to know that ahead of time. And my question, and you mentioned that this would be rather science-based, I'm concerned that the amount of change that's occurring in the climate is making, whether it's in the flood area, a 500-year flood or a 200-year flood, and much in the fire arena where we say, well, this is a catastrophic fire and it's going to occur X times in a lengthy period of time, that all of that is based on data that's been collected yesterday and before yesterday. And the issue is with the climate changing so rapidly, so quickly, that, that those predictive models may well be out of date. So I would like to know a little bit more about the risk mapping and what does that mean and how does it get down to the cities. Now our commissioners here represent communities like Oak Ridge and Walton, communities that are really surrounded by forests. Others of us are representing urban areas that are potentially threatened by wildfire because of the tremendous canopy that's there in South Eugene and in Springfield. So would you give us a little walkthrough of this risk map discussion?
I'll take an initial stab at that, and then Alex can jump in, just because in 2005, when we developed the initial Lane County Risk Assessment, Land Management did that analysis, and I can tell you what was involved then. The risk map, it is at this scale, at a countywide scale, it is rather granular, Of course, there can be smaller specific study areas. It involved two elements. One was a quantitative analysis of different mappable GIS characteristics, and the other was sort of a qualitative assessment that came out of surveys given to all of the local rural fire protection districts, because they kind of know their districts, they know the lay of the land. It was sort of a ground truthing. So for the initial risk assessment, what goes into building that model is an evaluation of a number of characteristics. We look at things like fuel type, so the fuel model on the ground, what's there? Is it a flashy fuel? Is it something that has a higher water content? Look at slopes aspects, so if a hill is a south-facing slope, obviously it's drier, it gets more sun, that's a factor. Then we look at response time, so if there is an initial ignition, are there resources available in that area, or is it way out somewhere where it's difficult to get resources there? We look at ignition points, and those are both man-made, and of course, lightning strikes. There's data that actually can show where those lightning strikes and different causes are. And then there's things like wind patterns and weather, and that gets kind of more to your question, is how do these predictive models bring in this, the newer changes with climate change? And I can tell you in 2005, that wasn't a factor that was evaluated. Since that plan in the last 10 years, or even longer now, as Alex mentioned, we've seen a 45% increase in wildfires in Lane County. So some of that data, that historic fire ignitions and fire spread and that's been in the county, that will be factored into the newer model. But can it really be predictive of something, like climate change? We're just not quite there yet, but I'll let Alex jump in if he has any thoughts.
One thing I would like to point out with these risk maps is there's basically three categories. There's a high risk, there's a moderate risk, and there's a low risk. What some funding agencies nationally have done is they've started including that moderate risk where they normally only funded high risk. And so if we were concerned about where that climate might be, including moderate risk into some of our plan documents might be a really good way to capture where this might go in the future. It's 2000, and so this is the most recent data is going to come out of the U.S. Forest Service, and it was done for the entire Northwest. It is granular, so it doesn't get down to neighborhood-specific type qualities. But generally, where you have high risk, you will have an associated moderate risk surrounding that. So that would be a good option if we were concerned about that, to play it safe and say we'll put in these implementation plans for moderate risk areas as well.
Okay, and I'm sure there'll be other questions about that. My second question is, and I'll try to limit this to 2 questions on my first round here, is you mentioned that the wildfire plan is not regulatory, but it does allow for other jurisdictions besides you as the writer of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, so that if there are regulatory changes that are needed, those occur by the relevant governments that are involved. Is that a fair statement to further examine the phrase "does not regulate"?
Chair Soren, Commissioners, I think that's fair. Basically, the plan, we'll ask the board to adopt it by resolution, and it'll be a guiding document. And we'll list a number of action items, and some of those action items might point to a potential regulatory change, but the plan itself doesn't change any of the policies in the comprehensive plan. It's not a land use document, so there isn't a strict regulatory component to it.
So, for example, we heard complaints from fire agencies that if our roads are too narrow and the requirements for roads in rural areas are too narrow, they do not accommodate certain types of emergency fire apparatus, trucks, whatever, that are going to be needed. Same with bridges and other things. And so I think, and also setbacks. I'd like to, I think that setbacks are one of the most significant things, at least from what I saw from the Camp Fire, is if you had more setbacks, some of those homes were actually saved. So I envision a fire and flood protection ordinance that this board would be working on simultaneously with your with your plan? Because the plan, it sounds like, is done by the Oregon Department of Forestry. And we do the land use regulation, and the fire people put out the fires. And I know that's kind of a gross oversimplification, but we do have a role in this. And so, anyway, I want to make sure all the commissioners get whatever questions they have. So does anyone want to start off? No?
I guess I can.
Okay, Commissioner
Off a little
Bozievich?
You're not going to be able to see this from there, but this is the 100-year graph. It goes from 1911 to 2017. And way over here in the beginning of the century, there's a lot of fire. And then we go along, basically, and we have a couple more fires recently. 20-year look back is not a trend. So that first graph you put up, I just want to say data-wise, and as somebody that has done a lot of data work, is not a trend. Because if you took the 100-year graph, it'd actually be going down. So I just want to make that point. But that doesn't change the fact that we need to have a community wildfire protection plan. And I've worked closely with Link over the years. I really understand, and really, I can't tell you how much I appreciate ODF's initial attack, and the way they do that. You guys are the best. I only wish we could convince the Forest Service to adopt some of your methods, and we might not have had some of the fires we had in the last couple of years, some of that were left burning for weeks at less than 5 acres. So, that's just, but, really, the risk is increasing. Part of it's our population's growing at 1% a year. And it's something we're just not going to, as a board, pass a law that prevents our population from growing. So that means there's more and more people pushing into that, urban-rural interface and with the forest. And that's something, that, maybe our land use code can help address. I kind of was surprised here that southern exposure is a risk factor, just mostly because of humidity, when really the risk in this area is about being on the northeast side of a slope. And he's shaking his head, because the predominant winds in the summertime are from the north, but the really scary winds in the summertime for the firefighters are northeast and easterly winds, because they bring in the super low humidity and the red flag conditions, and sometimes very high summer winds, and our real concerns about a paradise or something like that is that case when you have that strong east wind. You name the fire that's historic in Oregon, east wind event, Tillamook, Salmonberry, one after another. It's about east wind events. That's what made the Yellow Point fire so damn scary, is it started on an east wind event. Fortunately, the wind changed for us and we were lucky, but man, that fire was moving. So that has to be, as we look at risk factors, which leads me to the South Hills of Eugene and the Thurston Hills, because guess what's on the north side and northeast sides? It's some of our most intense development in this area. Yet we have the city of Eugene adopting a buildable lands inventory that says you can develop 35% slopes on the South Hills. That's where, we don't have an influence on that, unfortunately, but we need to work with our partners about not assuming developable lands that are really at risk of wildfire. Because that's just, when you talk about that north-facing 35% slope, it gives me nightmares. I mean, I used to work with Joe Zaludak back when he was, the fire marshal, not the fire chief, when I was at EWEB, and talk about planning, wildfire prevention and attack strategies, et cetera. And basically, he told me back then, we'll be looking at evacuation, and that's it. We're not going to look at trying to fight anything in the South Hills. It's just physically not possible. So, that's, as we think about it, it's not just a rural issue. It is, South Eugene, it is the Thurston Hills. But, we do have this variance in risk. I don't think the northeast slope of somewhere on the far side of West Lane County, where you have all the maritime influence, has quite the risk as a northeast slope where there's actually more lightning activity on the east side closer to Oak Ridge. So it'll be interesting to see how that risk map looks. But I really look forward to the work and look forward to supporting what we can through land use actions in the future. But they have to be informed by good data, and I really look forward to those risk maps, and I look forward to understanding fire behavior as it applies in Western Lane, or Western Oregon and Lane County, sorry. So I'm so used to saying West Lane Fire Authority, they kind of go together.
Any other commissioner comments, questions? Commissioner Burney?
This is really informative. Thanks a lot. I agree with Commissioner Bozovic, but come to the exact opposite conclusion. I think 100 years of data is more than a small amount of data, but I think we're in an environment, my sense from even looking at your graphs, that is kind of unknown. And as it's unknown, it seems as if we do know that the fire season is getting longer, and it's getting hotter, and it's getting drier. And as we look at interventions, from what you said, from what I've learned, we're not just looking at stopping fires and containing them, we're also looking at getting the hell out of the way. So I'm eager to hear more. I'm eager to have you report back after your first citizen input. I'm eager to hear how you reach out to get that citizen input, because I think this issue is really front and center. And I look forward to the good work that you're doing. And I would say, and maybe I'm wrong, I mean, I'm wrong more than I'm right, but I would say that while your work won't regulate, secure funding, or guarantee implementation, the intent is to inform, correct, regulations as appropriate,
Yes.
and securing funding as available and being implemented. And I certainly support that 1,000%.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the update. Seems like it's been woefully overdue for an update for this particular plan. And my district happens to be extremely susceptible to wildfire. And know that everybody it's on top of their mind as we come closer and closer to summertime. I would also like to be kind of briefed as the process goes instead of waiting till the very end. And so if that's, enough head nods throughout the commission here, I personally would like it that way, and want to thank you very much for bringing it up so that we can make sure we have a thorough updated plan, and probably do that perhaps more often than every 10 years.
And I'll just add regarding the update, is that prior to going out for the public input, you want to consider maybe having a briefing for us that we could do maybe at an evening meeting that would inform the public. We are trying to integrate our outreach to our public, which overlaps nicely with the public you serve. And so that's an idea, ahead of your public input sessions. I'm told that we have up to 30,000 viewers of our meetings, so that's a way of reaching people. And my other question had to do with the scale of the risk maps. You heard about things like really huge land masses like the East Lane District, but then, we got this tiny little group of people there in South Eugene, and here we are vulnerable to this. How detailed are these maps going to get? Are these down to the neighborhood? Are they just kind of at the big square level, or how would you describe it?
I may have an example of one of our older maps. I'm hesitant to show it just because the data is quite outdated, but might give you a sense for some of the initial risk assessment that we did back in 2005. The newer data is going to provide a better a little bit better scale, but this.
It's Waldo Lake on the right, I could see.
Yeah. So this is, we broke the county up into different geographic regions, and then again we did some modeling with the GIS, and then we spoke with the local fire protection districts and the Department of Forestry. And this was the kind of maps that were developed back in 2005. And you can see this map is kind of heavily influenced by a lot of the lightning ignitions that we have in Commissioner Buck's district and out in Eastern Lane. But obviously there is the infrastructure around Oak Ridge, and there's no surprise that there's a high wildfire risk there. There's been a number of.
And this is the scale that you can get to. This isn't like Pete's house and Pete's neighbor's house in South Eugene.
This was the scale we got to in 2005. As we dig into the new data, it may be possible to get to a better scale. We did get at a higher resolution with those sort of qualitative maps. We printed out basically air photos for all the fire districts, and they kind of circled the areas that were of concern, and that analysis did inform these maps.
Yeah. Okay. And then what is your timeline on the public involvement for the plan?
Sure. So
You had it up there, the timeline.
as Alex mentioned, we're working with Oregon State Extension Services to generate some outreach work, including a survey, and that's starting in the spring, and we anticipate it'll go through the summer.
Who are they surveying?
Well, there'll be a sort of it'll be similar to what we did in the initial effort. There'll be community perception survey, what do they feel about wildfire? There's a whole range of questions. What are their concerns? What are their feelings about wildfire risk in the county? What is their level of support for additional regulations? There can be a number of customized questions that will kind of.
Who is being surveyed?
Rural landowners.
Rural landowners.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Farr? Okay. So let's if there's no other questions, you guys have any closing comments? The end? Keep going?
Thanks for your support. We did get the direction. We'll plan a check-in with the board prior to initiating the community outreach.
Okay. Thank you. And I hope we get back from you, Mr. Miller, some reaction in terms of this ongoing interest the board has in doing what we can do within our regulatory realm to integrate emergency planning, land use, setbacks, road standards that'll help the firefighters, those kinds of things. So we just don't wait around till the end of this report, and then the report says, oh, by the way, you should have more setback standards, and you should have wider roads so that the fire vehicles come through. I would like to, just speaking for myself, I would like to advance that and get going on that.
Sure. I appreciate that, and I know that's some of the initial discussions we've had as a group is what are some of the things around our deficiencies in our current land use regulation. So I can certainly engage this group and get that feedback, but not necessarily wait till the end of the planning process. I know next week we're coming to the board to have a discussion on just this very topic, so we will stay.
And is that on floods or is that on fires?
Well, it was initially on fire siting standards, but then during, I believe it was agenda setting, this topic about flooding came back up. I think we only have 30 minutes on the agenda, so it might be pretty tight to talk about both of those topics, but we can, obviously have additional work sessions.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate all your good work.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we can have our friends, they're already moving forward, almost like a fire attack there. It's going good. 12B, Order 19-03-12-11, in the matter of approving the jurisdictional transfer of Delta Highway County Road number 1354 from Lane County to ODOT and granting authority to the county administrator to execute the jurisdictional transfer agreement. And with us to discuss this is Ms. Peggy Kepler, a Lane County engineer, and you can introduce your colleague there and tell us what we need to know. We've been working on this for a number of years, so sounds like we're finally getting there.
Mr. Chair, just before we get started, I wanted to flag this maybe after this item because Sasha Vartarian is here, our transportation planning supervisor, who can address item 6C5. So maybe when you're done with this item, you could take that one up.
Good idea. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We're just here to bring forth the final jurisdictional transfer of 3 roadways that were identified in House Bill 2017. We've also, in that House Bill, the Oregon Department of Transportation was given direction to transfer Territorial Highway and also the Springfield Crestwell Highway to the county. And then as part of that agreement would be also to accept the jurisdictional transfer of Delta Highway. And right now, we have both of the previous ones approved, and they're going to the Transportation Commission this month. And then the current one that we're looking at is Delta Highway. This is the final one. It is Lane County jurisdiction now. We're requesting that the agreement be approved and permission for the county administrator to sign that agreement. So that's the entire of my presentation, but if you have any questions about that, please let me.
Okay, and do we have a motion or a comments from the board? Commissioner Bozievich.
So I'll move approval of Order 1903-1211 in the matter of approving the jurisdictional transfer of Delta Highway from Lane County to ODOT and granting authority to the county administrator to execute the jurisdictional transfer of agreement. And then I'd like to speak on the motion after a second.
Okay, is there a second?
Second?
So it's been moved by Commissioner Bozievich, seconded by Commissioner Buck, to approve Order 1903-12-11 as presented. And Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. Wow, this has been a long time coming. I can't remember when the initial concept came up about trading Territorial Highway for Delta Highway.
1851.
But I mean, it's been a long time that we've been working on this, and it seems like a long time ago, we went on that bus tour with the legislators and on the big LTD bus, and we drove, they had me do the tour guide routine as we drove down Delta Highway, you know, first down 6th and 7th Avenue, pointing out that that was a state highway at that time, you know, and then as we went across the bridge, Washington Jefferson Bridge, and got on Delta, pointing out that this is a county road. And then we got on Beltline, which was a state highway again. And it was kind of an aha moment for some of the legislators that were looking at trying to do these jurisdictional transfers and fix a lot of the road responsibilities across the state. And there were several that were done besides what's being done in Lane County. But this is the final step in fixing some of those here in Lane County, where there were a couple roads ODOT was maintaining not so well, particularly Territorial, which was tertiary in their maintenance list, which means it gets basically minimal maintenance and it's one of the last things ODOT plows, et cetera. It just didn't make sense for ODOT to even be, you know, maintaining Territorial, other than we wanted to make sure that they gave us enough money to kind of bring it up to standards before we took it over, which was part of this whole deal. And, you know, you look at Delta Highway that connects to state highways as a highway, and it sure looks like a state highway, and it kind of, if it looks like a highway, it walks like a highway. Maybe it should be a state highway. So I really appreciate everything in the background, the years of work that's come to this final board order. I mean, this is going to be the last action we take on all these transfers as a board. There'll be future actions approving projects on Territorial, but that's down the road. But, yeah, this is really the final piece of putting this straightening out of who really should be maintaining what road here in Lane County and getting it sort of reorganized, and a statewide kind of reorganization that came with House Bill 2017. So I really appreciate all the long work that's gone into this by staff over the years, and really appreciate getting to make the motion.
Okay, further comments by commissioners?
I feel like I've had so much to do with all of this. It seems evident from the testimony of our previous 2 commissioners that they have a long-term relationship with you, and I think they're reluctant to end it, but since we don't, congratulations, get on with it. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Agreed. Nothing more to say?
all right. So the motion's been made and seconded. Debates ensued. Any further comments by commissioners? Hearing none, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. Vote is 5-0. All commissioners present and voting yes. And so the order is adopted. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Now we'll go back to the item from the consent calendar, item 6C5, Order 19-03-12-07, in the matter of confirming the appointment of 2 vacant positions on the Transportation Advisory Committee. Track and Ms. Vartanian, our Transportation Planning Supervisor, is here. And did I say your name right?
You did.
Okay, good. Do you want to make some comments, or do you think it's pretty self-explanatory?
I'm happy to make some comments. I understand there were some questions about the at-large appointment.
Yeah. Okay, Commissioner Burney, go ahead.
I apologize for the time imposition. I want this group to know that Sasha is my trainer for the Metropolitan Planning Commission, and she's done an amazing job. She didn't have a lot to work with. It was just a very simple question. I was looking at all the paperwork, and I had no idea, but as it turns out, a gentleman that I've worked with before, Chris Hazen, applied, and I know his background, and I know his background in infrastructure. I won't get into it, but he used to work with actually the largest energy efficiency engineering firm in Northern California, and the work that we did intersected with them a bit. So it was just the question, and I can't believe I've imposed this much on your time. It was just the question. I know, I don't know the other gentlemen, and it may be that they're far more qualified, but I just was curious about that only because I know this particular individual's background, and I've worked with him before.
Mayor Sorensen, Commissioner Burney, and Commissioners, when we look at appointing track representatives, we're looking for a diverse committee. So we're not looking at just the individual applicant. We're looking at geography and also their interests. And so while all applicants were very qualified, we looked at the at-large representative that staff recommended as Mr. Marshall, living in Coburg, represented a geographic diversity that we currently do not have on the committee, as well as he serves on the Planning Commission for the city of Coburg, so he also represents a land use perspective, and he has an engineering background. So that was the thought that went into that recommendation. As well, we already do have someone serving that serves for South Eugene and has a very strong interest in walking and biking. They do not own a car, and climate change was a high priority in their application.
That's all I had. That makes eminent sense. Thank you. For me, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the order as presented?
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Bozevich to approve the order 19-03-12-07. I just want to say that I asked Mr. Hazen to apply, and I think he's an excellent candidate, and whether we appoint him, which we're not today, to the Transportation Advisory Committee, I do think he's an excellent candidate, excellent potential person to be on many committees, and I just asked staff to keep him in mind in the future. And I don't have any prior business relationship with him, but I've worked with him on other things, and he's a really smart guy. He grew up in Eugene, spent his business career in Asia and in Northern California, and moved back to Eugene for bringing his family here. So, he's a really bright guy and wants to be involved.
If I may, Chair Sorensen, we do hold the applications for a full year, so if another vacancy opens up, that's a consideration.
Good. Okay, so let's move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. No. Vote is 5-0. All commissioners present voting, and the order is adopted. Thank you very much. Okay, so we are now down to item C, 12C. Mr. Hurley can come forward, and/or others. And this is item 12C, Order 19-03-12-12, in the matter of approving the purchase of Data Transfer Solutions, LLC Professional Services and ViewWorks Software for Asset and Road Management in the amount not to exceed $560,000 and granting authority to the county administrator to execute the contract. With us to discuss this is Dan Hurley, Lane County Public Works Director. And Mr. Hurley, welcome, and please introduce the folks with you today.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. With me today, we have Michael Laborde, who will be the project manager for this project, and Janet Labonte, who helped us through the RFP and contracting process. So this is for our asset management system. We're very excited to come to you today with a recommendation to approve this contract. And it's a very expensive purchase at $560,000. We thought it would be worth coming to the board in your regular session to discuss why we would be purchasing something that's expensive and highlight what it does for the county and for our community. So this investment is needed so that we can efficiently target our investments into our transportation assets. It stemmed out of a 2017 audit by our performance auditor. She looked at our road and bridge maintenance system and acknowledged that we have multiple systems for tracking our assets and the condition of those assets, but we lack a unified system. And many of those the separate systems are reaching end of life. And so we were needing an integrated system that can pull all this data together so that we can make better informed decisions for investing in our assets. This purchase of an asset management system will dramatically move Lane County into the 21st century. Asset management has become a standard best management practice in public works. And it will allow us to pull all sorts of data so that we can make great decisions. We think we have a great vendor here with DTS. We went through a terrific process led by Janet. We received 8 proposals. We interviewed 4 firms. We had a multidisciplinary team to look at these. And the one that we're recommending for selection, DTS, has a fantastic package that we think we can use not only for our road and bridge assets, but for other elements around public works, such as facilities, possibly at the fairgrounds to track conditions of assets. They've done work for firms as large as Disney, and it's a fantastic system with a lot of mobile applications. So you might be wondering, what is an asset management system? It's a very robust and sophisticated software system that can pull in all sorts of data, so spatial data, inventory, age, condition, value of these different assets. And it'll also allow us to pull in future data, so our crews out in the field have tablets and they can pull in pictures of the assets, other information that pulls that in so we can more efficiently bring our data together. So this will be able to allow us to use our data to prioritize our investments and have a more complete inventory of our system. It will help us optimize where we might put future money. So if we got another SRS payment, where is the best place to put that money? And some might question, why would we spend this much? But the cost of spending millions of dollars on a road treatment that may not be necessary at that time and place outweighs that potential cost. And I think that the purchase of this system will pay for itself over time with efficiencies. If the board approves, we'll look forward to working with Michael Laborde, as I said, as the project manager on this. He knows our systems over at Public Works well, and we'll be moving through an aggressive time frame to implement this system once we execute the contract. They're looking at a May through October implementation of the system. Subject to your questions.
Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with asset management software and all that, but I'm just a little bit curious because we had been using a sort of asset management software, at least for our surface roads, that I think was being supplied through either Oasis or AOC.
We're using Street Saver for tracking our pavement condition index. Yeah. And this will be able to pull that information into it. And I think we'll still probably be using that one on the side. And Orrin will be up here later and maybe can ask that question. But this is much broader than that system.
Because this will bring in bridges and other assets within the right-of-ways, and eventually, if it's a full asset management program, can handle other fixed assets like buildings.
Correct.
So, yeah, it's a powerful tool, but, and it, 560,000 sounds like a lot of money, but what's the estimated value of our highway and road assets right now?
Do we have a number on that? It's well over $500 million, I would say, but do we know?
A lot of rivers around 7 billion, but.
Yeah, I was
okay.
going to say, I thought there's a order of magnitude you're off there. I thought it was in the range of 6 to 7 billion.
Okay, so I don't know. But this system will help us quantify that.
Yeah, so, and that's one of those things where, but when people think of us spending $500,000, we're spending $500,000 to better manage and invest correctly in maintaining this huge asset that's our county road system. From the 417, I think it is, bridges that we have, to the almost 10,000 culverts, to the 1,400 miles of roadway. It's worth a lot of money. And investing this in actually being able to, objectively, through data, generate a capital improvement plan that has the best impact. Right now, a lot of capital improvement plans, I know because I've run them before, are sort of, what's breaking right now. Not so much of trying to get ahead and making sure we're not overspending money in one place and underspending in another area that's going to end up costing us 10 to repair when we could have spent 1, maintaining. So that's really what this plan's about, is trying to get us to be spending that $1 maintaining rather than $10 on a repair, and spending $500,000 to have the tool to guide us and do that for a, $6 billion, $7 billion, $5 billion, multiple billion-dollar asset is a reasonable expense. And I really support the process you guys went through and the selection of the vendor and all that, and I look forward to seeing the results over the years. I know it's going to probably take a year to populate the database even, so as the IT folks are going, yeah.
Okay, Commissioner.
I think it's a great idea to have a new system that's, top of the line system. I do have a question. Will it be able to put in every available county-owned lot that we have, every building? Will it be able to do that as well as roads?
We haven't looked at it for that function. I guess there's possibilities there. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
The system itself absolutely would handle it. We'd need a plan on how to go about doing that, but it absolutely could be handled in the system.
My thought is, if we don't have something like this, that would be an additional good use of that software system.
We don't, and, you raise a point that these are the kind of investments that we're making typically in one department will drive. So another example is in Health and Human Services, we've invested in a tool over the last couple of years called Tableau. It's a data analytics tool, focused mostly because H&HS, through our community health centers primarily, have wanted to better utilize and understand the data of our patients through our 6 health clinics. That tool, though, we've now started to broaden for use in other departments that also want access to critical data. So our Technology Services Department has done really important work in making sure we get data into that system so other departments can utilize it. So I think we would want to look at utilizing this tool wherever else we could for facilities and for other assets that we have. The other thing I just wanted to mention was, we talk about a $6 billion asset. It is the largest asset that the county owns. It's also the largest number of roads and bridges. Lane County has the largest number of roads and bridges of any county or city in the state of Oregon. So when we compare to all other counties and cities, we have the largest number of bridges and the largest number of miles of roads that we're responsible for maintaining, and they're actually in pretty good condition, and we want to keep them that way because the cost of maintaining them at a good level is much less than it would be when they deteriorate and we have to invest more in there.
I think I come at it from a maybe more of a housing, commercial background, because, asset management is a key tool in that industry as well. And what I don't want to see is, we found another lot again we didn't know we had, or a building that's not being used, and all that stuff would already be in a system like this if it was capable of doing it. So I would like to see it, eventually encompass that as well.
Okay.
My turn. I understand the need for, this is software, right? I assume it's software that's proprietary, it's been developed, it's being modified for our purposes, and this is what it costs. My only experience with software, by the way, with my business was Salesforce, which was actually very expansive to the degree you modified it for your purposes. So I have questions. I assume that this process has yielded a cost benefit. You could have paid more, you could have paid less. This is kind of where you landed. Does this, and I don't question that, I don't second, guess that. Does this software, is this something that we can not necessarily share our data, but make the platform available to other communities in Lane County?
No, we're given a certain number of licenses that we're able to use, but no, we wouldn't be able to share that.
Has any discussions occurred to find out what the cost, if in fact other areas, rural areas, that have jurisdictions that own bridges and roads, et cetera, what the cost would be to get additional licenses in that event? Has that even been pre-negotiated?
I don't know. We might be able to share within our cities, being within they're in the county, but we haven't explored that. But sharing out to other counties, throughout the state, I don't think would be an option. But you want to speak to that in the contract?
Oh, I wasn't thinking other
We did
counties.
not cover any kind of ground like that with the vendor, and we pushed very hard for some good pricing. So I'm not sure that they'd be willing to just extend that pricing anywhere and everywhere. So we would have to negotiate for anything like that. And I found in the past that the vendors are always willing to have those talks. It just comes down to the dollars.
Yes, I found that in the past too. And I've also found in the past the best time to negotiate is if a board withholds a decision until your negotiations are done. But those were my questions. I'm trying to think, how can we extend this really cool thing to other municipalities, even if they're smaller in our county, and really provide that service if in fact there's even the demand for that down the road when they see how robust you say this is.
There would also be some review and analysis that would have to be put into how would we even connect some of those
That is
locations.
correct. All that would need to be.
Because this will be an on-premise solution. So I do understand what you're saying, I agree, and we've definitely had other deals that we've done that way. But we would have to look at not only the cost, but also how we would get to it.
Well, I'm going to vote for this. It's just I just am hoping you'll think that through, and that might guide further discussions with this particular vendor, so that we can even be of greater service if needed. That's all.
Okay, so any further comments? If not, I'll turn to the board and ask if there's a motion.
I think Pat Farmer.
Oh, Commissioner Farr, are you?
No question, thank you.
Okay, all right, so who is best suited to make the motion to approve this?
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
been moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Bozovich to approve Order 19-03-12-12, and as presented. Is there any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries 5-0. All commissioners present and voting. Thank you very much. Appreciate your good work on this. Okay. We are now going to 12D, and that is our fourth reading and deliberations on ordinance PA 1365 in the matter of amending the rural comprehensive plan to redesignate land from forest land to marginal land, to rezone land from impacted forest land F2 to marginal land, and adopting savings and severability clauses. Just as an initial matter, the Land Management Division, they're supposed to alert me as to whether Mr. Malone is involved in any of these land use cases, and that wasn't done today, so I'm wondering if you know.
I have attached your letter disclaiming that and put that in the record
Okay,
already.
very good. So that disclosure that I have a business relationship with Mr. Malone, who is a lawyer, who works with me on occasionally on other things, but not on this, and I don't discuss his legal work on land use matters with him. Okay. Now, I guess we left this off that we are ready to conclude our deliberations on this matter. Do either of you want to make any comments before we continue our deliberations?
I just have some background on past board history, but I don't have anything specific besides the changes that were made to the findings and the ordinance. But we're happy to answer questions for you.
Very good. Okay, since we have been through this a couple of times, do any commissioners want to be recognized for a motion or for comments on this? Yeah.
So I'll move approval of ordinance number PA 1365.
Okay, is there a second?
Second?
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Bozevich, seconded by Commissioner Buck to approve the ordinance as presented. Do any commissioners wish to make any comments about this? Okay, seeing none, I will just say that I think that when there's ample discussion in the record that there is big game habitat, that there's elk habitat, that the impact of these this land use change is going to affect the elk, that the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has a letter in the record, and that the testimony before the Planning Commission was on this topic, that alone would allow the board to deny it. But in addition to that, there was substantial testimony by neighbors about the impact of water shortages and difficulty with water, and the comeback was, well, we'll do testing in the future. And to me, to my mind, believing the testimony of the neighbors that there are in fact some pretty significant water quantity issues, that leads me to say that we should not approve this. But I realize that's one commissioner's perspective. Other comments and questions, comments, or are we ready for a vote?
I have a question.
Yeah.
And forgive my newness at this, I'm really trying to understand better. When we allowed, what was it, a 4-lot division?
Maybe they can.
Oh, I'm sorry. When the action that we took, if it's less, we required a water study, correct? Mm-hmm. And are we, if less lots are developed, will we still require a water study
The
to
water,
do that?
the water study is going to be required regardless at the time of land division. And they need to show that there is sufficient water to supply the number of dwellings and parcels that they're proposing without there being an impact on surrounding wells.
And what if we find that there will be an impact on surrounding wells?
Then the lots may be limited at that time of land division.
And if the lots are limited, does that mean the finding will be that for that limited number of lots, there is in fact no impact on wells and water to the surrounding homes?
So we will.
Forgive me.
No, that's okay. The approval of the land division, each lot that gets approved have to prove that they have potable water to supply those lots. And so the ones, so say they apply for 4, but we only approve 2, they will have to have demonstrated that there's enough water for those 2 that we've approved.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you. No,
Is it fair to say that the water requirement focuses on the ability of the well that the landowner wishes to build, on their ability to produce enough water for their property? It does not have anything to do with the testimony that I just alluded to, that the other properties fear and testified as to the extent of the water problems. That has no bearing, as I understand it. The rule is you're going to look at whether or not there's proper production of water on the land that is being adjudicated here.
That's correct. We would request a report from a licensed geologist that they demonstrate that with that report.
Yeah, and the effect on the other people is, which is what all the testimony was about, is not a factor.
It is if they look at the surrounding wells and the impact that additional development would have on those wells. And I believe that's something that the geologist would evaluate.
Yeah, I think that's the only point I was going to chime in on is that I don't think the evaluation is done in a vacuum. That is, they'll analyze the well proposed for the lot to be developed, but I think they take into account the general water tables in the area to the extent that that may affect other wells.
Okay, very good. So seeing no other requests for commissioners to speak, we'll take a vote on this. This is the vote on approving the fourth reading on ordinance PA 1365. Motion's been made, seconded. We're now going to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Start, yep, time
This is an ordinance, isn't
Time
it?
out. He made a mistake. We do not want to number the number of mistakes. So, Mr. Mokrahysky, will you please poll the vote of the board?
Commissioner Bozievich,
Aye.
Commissioner Burney,
Aye.
Commissioner Buck,
Aye.
Commissioner Farr,
Aye.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Nay.
Passes 4-1.
Very good. Thank you. So the vote is 4 yes, 1 no, and I'm voting no. So that is our record on that. Now we are turning to item 12E, and thank you so much, both of you. Thank you. We are moving to item 12E, local access roads. Our Public Works Director, Dan Hurley, is here, and he's been here since I've been here at 7:55 a.m. And so we're here to talk about local access roads, and there's quite a crew here for you to introduce Mr. Hurley, so please do so when you get a chance,
All right.
after your technology is fully functional.
Okay, so for your last item of the day, Chair Sorensen, we have a very messy issue of the local access roads. Some of you are well familiar with these, others may not. So I'm going to give you a broad overview and maybe some initial recommendations where we might go with this. But because this is a very complex, complicated issue, I brought a team here. We have Oren Schumacher, who is our road maintenance division manager. He'll talk about some of the safety challenges, maintenance challenges that we have with these roads. We have Peggy Kepler, our county engineer. She'll talk about a process for the residents to be able to improve these roads, as well as costs of investment into our roads and road standards. And then I also have Jay Blamey, our county surveyor, who can talk about the process to establish a county road from a local access road. So local access roads, we have under 200 miles of them. You can see these red dots scattered throughout the county, and we can zoom in on any particular area here. I have 6 examples that I have some slides of that will highlight some of the oddities of local access roads and the challenges that they present for us. But we have 3 types of roads that are out there in the county areas. There are private roads, which are maintained by the residents of that road. There are county roads that are maintained by the county. And then there's this gray area of local access roads, which have been dedicated to the public, but we don't put public money into them. The responsibility lies on the benefiting property owners of that road. So for decades, we've adhered to this policy that we don't put road fund money into local access roads, and unless there's an emergency, and we have stepped in on occasion to replace a bridge or to repair a major fail. But other than that, we don't put money into maintaining these roads. There was for Collard Lake Road board direction to perform limited maintenance on that road, and we should talk about what that means. But I would argue that this policy doesn't serve Lane County well and doesn't serve our residents well, and that maybe we should relook at this policy and possibly prioritize these roads and look at some options. So we could stick to the existing policy where we do nothing. We could take all these roads into our system, but there would be a major impact to our other road work we need to do. But maybe there's somewhere in the middle that we can land where we're prioritizing these roads and establishing thresholds of when they would become county roads. So with that, I think I'll pass to Oren, who can talk very directly about the challenges that these roads present for our system.
Chair Sorensen, Commissioners, I always know when we have a local access road when I get a call from a constituent that says there's something wrong with my road, there's a large pothole, there's no shoulder, there's no drainage. I can almost 100% guarantee you they're calling me from a local access road. Because we perform no maintenance on these roadways, and in turn, really what you find out is nobody does. They're not going to want to spend the monies to keep them up because it's costly. They believe that the public body should be taking care of those roadways if they're public, even though they're not a county road. So one of the larger things that we face during our maintenance activities is we skip these roads and we see the issues with that safety is number one. A lot of these roads won't have maintained striping. They won't have the proper signage. They may be down to one lane, limiting emergency access. All of those things combined really leave these LARs in a maintenance lurch. And by the time we get to hear about them or get to see them, they're usually in a condition that is now beyond maintenance and falls to the county engineer and design team, if we were to get there, to rebuild these systems. Collard Lake is a great example. You can see a picture right there. But these exist all over in varying sizes, from heavy use to very limited 3-home use type things. But if you're looking at them just from a safety and maintenance standpoint, they are one of the biggest challenges we face in serving the residents of Lane County, of how we respond and what we're able to do. So I guess that's my synopsis on the maintenance component of LARs.
Thank you, Oren. I think from here I'll jump to some of the examples. So the first one here, Collard Lake Road. That picture shows the current condition of Collard Lake. There was a tree that toppled over, and it's a steep cliff on that side, and took out a part of the road. There's a tree closer towards us that is going to go at some point and pull off more of the road. So Collard Lake Road, as you heard from the public testimony this morning, has a long and convoluted history stemming back to at least 1976. And we have a staff report that was done in 2006 that goes on for about 4 pages of different board action on this road. In 76, the board did take it in as a county road, but that decision was made on incorrect information that it needed to connect to other county roads that were actually not county roads. I have not seen in our files a board action that rescinded that, but subsequent board orders that authorized one-time money for repairs on this road say that it is not a county road. So we would need to look into that with legal counsel more to determine whether it is or is not. But there's a serious issue going on here, a significant failure. There are 8 other failures we've identified along this system. The cost to bring this up to county standards would be very significant. Just to fix this one failure would be about $62,000 according to our design engineer. To address the other 8 failures would be about $675,000, and to widen it to county standards and pave it would be about $1.4 million. So this road was originally constructed and became a local access road to service 1 subdivision. There are now 6 subdivisions serving over 100 parcels. So this may be at that threshold where we need to say that maybe this should be a county road. So I'd like to discuss that in the future with you. I would also recommend that maybe we have a work session particularly on this road because there is an emergency situation on this now. Another one to highlight some of the oddities around local access roads. So this one, Green Creek Road Bridge, back in 2006, there was a bridge there that was given a low rating. The board stepped in to take emergency action. Initially, they were going to assess that to the property owners and then reversed course and decided to use road fund to replace that bridge. And so it was then raised to a rating of 38 tons. And since then, Public Works has performed annual inspections on this bridge. Recently, at the end of last year, we received a report from the state bridge engineer that recommended lowering the rating to 7 tons due to some deterioration on the bridge. So we have since posted that and sent a mailer out to the property owners, giving them the situation because emergency vehicles cannot cross over this road with that rating. So a significant impact. To replace this bridge would be extremely expensive. I don't have an estimate on to do the repair work, but the challenges here are that it only services about 5 homes out there. So a very high cost for a county investment for serving very few residences. Another one here to highlight is Leverage Drive. So local access roads are the pink, county roads are blue. So this one in particular has been maintained for over 15 years by a gentleman into his 70s now. He's been maintaining it by himself with his tractor, and he's feeling the financial strain and the physical strain of trying to maintain that road. For whatever reason, I don't know the long history of this one. That section of Leverage Drive was never accepted as a county road, even though all the other subdivision roads in there have been accepted as county roads. So there are just these oddities in the system. Here's another one that shows some problematic issues of assessing the costs to the adjacent property owner. So this is Aspen Street over at the city of Springfield. That large lot there on the right of the local access road is the Centennial Elementary School. So if we were to assess, so the problem is this road is very much deteriorating, big potholes. It's heavily trafficked with all the people coming to the school. But should the neighbors on the left side of the road, share it with the school who's causing most of the traffic for the road, just one of those challenges. And then I think finally, 2 more. So I've got 2nd Avenue in Florence. So you've got Ocean Way, it turns a corner and then becomes a county road. Why? I don't know, but it's obviously frustrating to the neighbors that are on the part of the local access road to see where there's this county line where it's maintained and where it's not. That surface has failed on that road because it hasn't received any treatments over the years and is starting to pothole. It has some significant drainage issues. There was never a formalized drainage system in that, and so where you're seeing the small riprap there used to be about a 2.5-foot ledge that the property owners have thrown some rock in to try to maintain that. And then finally, I'll show this example from what we call Peaceful Valley. This is kind of southwest of Eugene. So we were contacted by a concerned resident who, there was a vehicle that got stuck at the corner of, where I'll put my mouse here, Larson and Peaceful Valley. And so for several hours, none of the residents, and there are probably about 50 different residents in this area, had no access out. And given the wildlife concerns that we talked about earlier, very concerned that they could be trapped like that. So the plan was that Serviceberry Lane would connect over here to Laughlin. And this last stretch of it, for whatever reason, is a local access road. And then this platted section was never constructed. And we have no way to force the developer to connect that at this time. So those are my examples. I'll pass this to Jay to talk briefly about the establishment process.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm going to be reading most of my presentation as 99% of it comes out of Lane Manual. So the authority to establish a county road is pursuant to ORS 368.016 and Lane Manual Chapter 15. ORS 368 simply states that the county may by resolution or order make any public road within its jurisdiction a county road. Lane Manual Chapter 15 procedures are much more detailed and are established, quote, for the purpose of delineating a uniform policy in Lane County for the acceptance of public roads for maintenance and conversions to county road status. It is intended that this policy will clarify and set the requirements and responsibilities of the individuals, public bodies, and departments involved in the acceptance of public roads. In addition, it provides the public with an outline of the required process for the acceptance of public roads for maintenance and conversion to county road status. Main Manual Chapter 15 establishes 5 guidelines to be considered for acceptance of a public road into the county road system. The first guideline is that roads providing local access may be accepted into the county road system if they provide a needed extension or improvement in the overall road network, or to provide access to significant commercial or industrial development or governmental or other public facilities. Number 2 guideline, roads created within subdivisions or partitions, primarily providing access to lots, shall be established as private access easements or local access roads, with appropriate property owners, associations, or districts providing for maintenance of these roads. Roads serving 4 or more lots or parcels may be considered for acceptance into the county road network for purposes of overall road connectivity or to otherwise provide a safe and efficient road network. The third guideline is that roads will function as collector roads within subdivisions or partitions may be accepted as county roads. The fourth guideline is that extensions of existing county roads within subdivisions may be accepted as county roads and classified appropriately according to their function. And the last guideline is that roads providing access to the boundary of national forests or other public lands may be accepted. To begin the process to bring a public road into as a county road, an application in the form of a petition signed by not less than 60% of the adjoiners shall be submitted to the Public Works Director. The petition shall include findings on how their application meets the guidelines previously mentioned and the criteria set forth in Lane Manual 15.410, which defines the minimum standards and design standards of a county road. Upon receipt of the application, the Public Works Director shall investigate and determine if the following conditions are met. Number 1, that the acceptance of the road is consistent with the guidelines. Number 2, that acceptance of the road is consistent with Lane Manual 15.410, County Road Standards. Number 3, that the road is currently defined as a public road. Number 4, that the road meets all county road design standards. Number 5, that the road is located within the dedicated public right-of-way. Number 6, the road is a benefit to the general public and intersects an existing county road, city street, or state highway. And number 7, any fences, buildings, or other structures within the area being accepted as a county road right-of-way needs to be removed at the landowner's expense. So after reviewing the application, the director shall provide a report in writing to the petitioners that their application has either met all the standards and policy criteria and will be recommended for acceptance, or that the road does not meet all standards and policy criteria, but the director deems it advisable to recommend to the board that the standards or policy criteria be waived, or that the road does not meet the standards and a waiver of the standards is not recommended. And finally, the road does not meet the policy criteria and a petition will be denied. If the director's report is denied, the petitioners can appeal in writing the director's findings directly to the board. If approved by the director, the county surveyor's office will prepare an establishment order to be considered by the board during consent calendar. The order will legally establish the road pursuant to ORS 368.016. It will accept any deeds acquired as right-of-way as county road. It will describe the road being added to the county road status. And finally, it will formally assign the road a county road number.
Thank you, Jay. And you touched on an important point with the design standards. Most of these roads don't meet current design standards. They were constructed privately, not to our county road standards. So Peggy will talk to that a little more, as well as the LID process.
So the owners currently have the option of making the improvements individually, or they could join together and make the improvements on the roadway, and no permit is required. They also have the option of creating a road district that would require a public process, and the administration would be through the county board. If they choose not to do that route, there are two other ways to initiate public improvements. The public improvements could be initiated by the Board of Commissioners, and that would require that there is a necessary for public safety or to promote the common welfare of the general public. The other process would involve a petition by the property owners. It would require 60% of the abutting property owners to sign the petition, and then a local improvement district. The design standards vary from anywhere from a 12-foot wide asphalt pavement to 24 feet wide as a county road system. The cost of a 18-foot, which is still at a local access road standard, is 18-foot wide, 2 inches of asphalt over a 10-inch crushed rocks structure. And that would roughly cost about $340,000 per mile. And that would not include any repairs if there were slides or if there were structural damages below that crushed rock system. So that would be an additional cost.
Okay, thank you, Peggy. So obviously, any sort of investments into these roads takes away from investments that we have planned for other maintenance and investment into our system. And so we have our transportation system plan that outlines projects for the next 30 years. So we would need to prioritize this work against that work. And that's what I would recommend moving forward, is that the board authorize staff to spend road fund money to do some additional research into our local access roads, so we can inventory these roads, see what condition they are in, what the standards that they've been constructed to, and then be able to prioritize these roads based on the number of properties they're serving, average trips per day, so that we can come to some sort of thresholds of where we might invest money into these roads. I do think we should return with a specific work session on Collard Lake, as I suggested earlier. I think we should explore the LID process more and make that an option for residents in certain circumstances. And I'd also like to explore policies where we can prevent circumstances like the one up there from happening in the future through our land management code. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for your discussion and questions.
Okay, well, thank you, and thanks for that great overview. I will start off by just asking a couple of questions. And first is, I do think we ought to have the special work session. I do think that would be good on the Collard Lake Road picture. But I wanted to know if in the process of putting together this bigger set of options for all the different types of local access roads, that you could distinguish between the local access roads where a developer made an application to the county and said, I want to get this land allowed for subdivision, and don't worry, Lane County will never have to maintain a road. It will never have to do that. And the board was just smiling because they thought that'd be a good idea. I myself have smiled several times in that setting. And so the subdivision went through, and the developer got the benefit. They then moved away, and now we have lots of people there who, some of them don't know what kind of road they're living on, but somebody made a lot of money off of all this, and it wasn't Lane County's taxpayers. So I want to see a distinction between what I would describe the the gentleman that's maintaining this road for 15 years, and now he's not just maintaining it for himself, he's maintaining it for other people. He didn't really get a huge benefit, but some of those other subdivisions, I believe, will fall into the example I'm giving, and that's the one I'm concerned about. The other thing is, I want to know what other counties have done in terms of having the landowners pay an assessment, if there is such a thing as an assessment, to keep the roads at the proper standards. And they can still be local access roads, but instead of having, you know, good neighbor Bob that does it maintenance when he can, or we form an association and it exists for 3 years and then it goes away and there's no more association. I'm interested in some alternative funding besides going to the road fund. And I don't know if there is such a thing out there or not. And I also think that there are instances, and I'm sure you'll identify them, where it really is in the public interest. That school example seems like a good one as an example where it should be taken in. Other commissioners? Commissioner Buck?
It's just interesting we landed on this particular example because this is my neighborhood. And I have gotten comments about that loop on Svarvis Ferry not being complete and people being stuck and not knowing how to get out. And that's a real issue. So when we do get to a work session and are able to look at, and I would be very interested in, you know, having you go through that process of evaluating the different LARs and seeing where they are. Because you wouldn't necessarily look at all of them saying, oh, well, actually, that one needs to be connected to the next road, unless you do that individual evaluation. I'm, like the chair, interested in knowing, are we allowing these currently, or are these old legacy kind of roads, or we still have LARs that develop every day?
We are still allowing them.
So I would love to talk about that more and whether we still want to do that, because I agree that is, they may never maintain them ultimately in the long run, and people don't have the money to be able to sock a whole bunch of money into their roads. And I don't know where that leads, but I would look forward to that particular discussion, because this is just going to be an ongoing problem if there's no end to LARs ever. And how much do we want, is there a cost benefit for continuing that? Or is it more beneficial to say, okay, we really need to switch these over? And I'm also curious what other counties do in this particular situation.
Thank you.
Joe?
Just kidding.
Followed by Jay.
Thanks. I agree, and I agree, but I'd like to say it my way. Yes, it sounds like part of this is prioritizing that you have to do. Yes, it sounds like we have a moving forward issue that we ought to solve before it gets worse. And yes, there ought to be a work session. Of course, I'm counting all these work sessions that we're supposedly having. I don't know when they're all going to occur, because several of them haven't yet.
We'll start meeting Tuesday nights.
Yeah.
Wednesday
At midnight. And although I do want to say, you mentioned something about a roads service district, and it sure seems to me that if there was some sort of partnership, I know this is for a work session, but if there was some sort of partnership the county could enter into with its full faith and credit in terms of bonding with road service districts that would then have to assess themselves, whether it's property taxes, whatever the mechanism is, to then contract, right, with our department so we could take care of this stuff. So I know for a fact that has been a solution for other issues. So I think there's a way to fix the past. I think there's a way to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. And I think all the while, you've got to prioritize this stuff.
Thanks. So, LARs, have an interesting statutory place as a public road, but not publicly maintained. Yet the statute does allow us to go in and do emergency maintenance or whatever maintenance we decide we want to direct as a board, which is basically a fix on failure mode, which is what we've done forever. And just had a discussion about asset management here a minute ago. Fix on failure is not management. And that's really what LARs have been about, is fix on failure. We have to start thinking a little bit differently, and particularly where fix on failure doesn't work. If it's servicing 100 parcels, fix on failure is not really a workable solution. If it's the secondary access to a fairly large residential area for fire egress, as we just finished talking about the community wildfire protection plan, is that, I think it's CWPP, I can't remember if it was protection or prevention. Yeah, 2 Ps though. But, we just finished talking about that. This may also be as part of what we think about in strategies for, wildfire egress and access. Yes, Green Lane off of Knight Road only leads to 5 residences, but did you just see how much forest was around that? And when you talk about access for initial attack and firefighting, some of those roads are really important to get there. So having a weight-limited bridge and inability to get fire apparatus down there is a concern of mine. So I do think this is maybe the first of a start of a conversation about, where do we draw those lines? Where should we maybe start thinking about that? Because I don't think it's really up to those, neighbors sometimes to take a street that's been in existence since before 1940 in some cases, and somehow or another magically bring it up to today's standards. We maintain, as county roads, multiple roads that don't meet our standards. In fact, I'd be curious to know how many miles out of our 1,400 don't meet county standards. Penn Road, Hall Road, Nelson Mountain Road, Stagecoach Road, I can name them off, just thinking about it sitting here, that are county-maintained roads that do not have a paved surface, do not have 50 feet of right-of-way. Some places are, I doubt they're 18 feet wide. And we've been maintaining those for years as county roads. So taking in an LAR maybe that has 100 parcels off of it that doesn't meet the 18 feet, maybe doesn't have, those standards, and asking those 100 parcels to somehow or another come up with $1.6 million to bring it to county standards is, I think, not a very fair ask. So, it's particularly seeing we have these roads, we already, there's all sorts of roads. Was it Burn Creek Road that we just fixed the slide into the?
Bernhardt Creek, yep.
Bernhardt Creek, sorry. I knew it began with a B and I was going to mess up the name. Bernhardt Creek Road. Yeah, gravel road, tree tipping over into the Slauslaw, creating a kind of a hole. Sounds kind of familiar. And we just fixed that for a significant cost. Gravel road doesn't meet our standards, but it's been in our road system. And I think one of the things, and I'll be interested to hear what legal counsel has to say, is from the research I've been presented, I think Collard Lake Road is an exception. I think we already accepted it, and we never took action to not accept it, to reverse that board decision. So taking in Collard Lake Road and taking on that responsibility won't make us responsible for all the rest of the LARs across the county, because I think that's an exception, and we need to deal with that as an exception. But I'm waiting to hear from legal counsel and your research on that, but at least from what I've seen. And I say all this as one of those red lines on here is my street. I live on a local access road. my neighbors and I get together every once in a while, and I write a check for $100, and they collect up enough $100 checks from the various neighbors and buy several truckloads worth of gravel, and one of our neighbors has a tractor with a drag blade behind it, and we keep the road up. I'm fortunate, though, that it's relatively flat, and somebody was smart enough to dig drainage ditches on both sides of it for most of the road, so it stays in pretty good shape. So my $100, I only have to write every once in a while, and the surface stays in pretty good shape because it only services about 18 households. So it's, so I understand the pain of a lot of the folks that are at local access roads, but I really look forward to that conversation about where do we draw a line, and this is where, unfortunately, we're paying for some of the loose practices of the past. Long before Senate Bill 100, if you look at Second Avenue in Heceta Beach, that was platted in the 40s. And those lots have just been developing kind of willy-nilly a little bit, and they threw a little asphalt mat down over some sand on top of a slope that went down to the backyards of the beachfront houses there, and it's the slope actually failing. Is that really a county responsibility or not? How many houses are there? We have to figure out where that line is, because we obviously can't afford in our capital program with our limited resources, and particularly the fact that the U.S. Forest Service harvest has gotten so low, which used to supply our road fund, where we used to do maintenance on some of these roads, even though we weren't maintaining them. That's kind of what's caused some of the confusion too, is people remember the heydays of the 70s when we had a $100 million reserve in the road fund. And if somebody called up and said, oh, I've got this pothole in front of my house, a road crew would come out and fix it because we had the money to do it. We just don't have that luxury anymore. So I really look forward to trying to develop a logical standard of drawing that line, of where we're going to put that, and thinking about some criteria where we might think about where we need to redesignate some of these local access roads as county roads. And then ones that are not made county roads, maybe some of those we even need to think about a process of returning them to private ownership. So it's really clear to the private owners that they live on a private road, they're responsible for maintaining it. And not do it in a way where we're trying to get fair market value for the right-of-way as we give it back to the property owners. So that's something. There's a other side of this I'd like to see too. Is there's some red on here that's like a half a block long, like one or two houses. Why is that a local access road and not a private road? And there's the converse of that. If everything was perfect, there would be no local access roads. They'd either be private or county.
One other thing, Commissioner Farr, I'm going to call on you in just a second.
Thank you.
One other thing to keep in mind is that when the county city road partnership was ended, and the county was giving, passing through from our federal forest receipts, road monies, we were providing money to our 12 cities on a formula, and of course, as a result of the decline in money from the federal government, and then later the decline of the guarantee of the money from the federal government, we completely ended that that city-county road partnership. Well, I'm one of the people that was affected directly, because when the city of Eugene was redoing all the roads up in the Friendly and Story and area, guess what? They assessed us a pretty substantial amount for the improvements that were made in that area. So I don't think there's anything wrong with us thinking about that as being a way to cope with this. And I do agree with Commissioner Bozevich that maybe the way to do this is just have a clear-cut line between public and private. And this bifurcated idea, and thank you so much, Commissioner Buck, for bringing up the idea, well, at least we could stop it, so that 20 years from now, the discussion will be on the remnant LARs rather than on yet another 20 years of LARs. Okay, Commissioner Farr and then Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I live inside the city, and as far as I know, none of my district has any local access roads, but I do care about it, and it's essential that people in Lane County can feel safe driving to and from their homes, wherever their homes may be. But it is a complex issue. Living in the city, I'm blessed by and cursed by a homeowners association that I pay into, and they distribute the repairs, maintenance, and various things, not necessarily on the roads, through the money that I contribute to a larger association. So I'm intrigued by the concept of a road service district. And a way that the people who actually are going to benefit the most greatly from the roads that have improved are the ones who pay for the improvements and pay for the maintenance. That being said, I also, living in the city, benefit from and I'm cursed by SDCs, which are forward-looking, backward-looking, and pay completely for the roads that I drive on. And they are a part of the price I paid for my property, the price I will sell my property for eventually, and the property taxes that I pay. So all of this makes it a very, very complex issue, something that we can debate for a long, long time. But I have a question. Earlier today, we talked about our Transportation Advisory Committee. It's a group of talented people, many of them with skills who are very transferable, and they have geographic diversity. Mr. Mokrahaiski, we've assigned to the Parks Advisory Committee, for instance, tasks to help us sort through complex issues and make a recommendation at the end of a certain period of time. We've had the local access roads for a long, long time, and if, as Commissioner Buck has suggested, we stop doing it now, we're still going to have the local access roads for a long, long time. Would it not be beneficial to perhaps have the Transportation Advisory Committee take a look at this and see if it is a task that they could undertake with help of staff and ultimately come up with a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners based upon their work?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Farr, our staff is nodding our heads that having that input from that Citizen Advisory Board would be beneficial. And I think we feel like there is a good role for the Transportation Advisory Committee to play in the process.
I will state this, that when I became a county commissioner, the Parks Advisory Committee felt marginalized to a certain extent. It took a couple of big events to get them fired up, and that really gave them legitimacy and gave them a sense of purpose, where the Parks Advisory Committee now really is a very valuable committee to the county that we can count on for very large tasks. The Roads Advisory Committee, now called the Transportation Advisory Committee, has felt marginalized, has felt trivialized even sometimes in the work that they do. This would be an opportunity for them to feel that their work and the work of these very talented people is something that can contribute to a long-term fix for a long-standing issue. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Joe?
I just wanted to make Dan keep standing by the. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Thank you, Orrin. Forgive me. When I suggested a work session, I didn't know we were going to have it. So it sounds, yeah. So it sounds to me, I'm just going to say this very briefly. I think there are solutions. I think, I've identified the 4 areas. I think everyone we've all said in our own way. I love Commissioner Farr's approach. So that's it. Let's have a work session that's informed by this Citizens Advisory Body and get on it.
Great, thank you for your input. We'll plan to come back.
I just wanted to say that Transportation Advisory Committee meets every other month, so this will lengthen the process, but it will allow you to take and have some input from another committee that can pull this information together and hold some hearings if needed, and then brings a recommendation to the board.
When are they next meeting?
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Chair, that would be a part of my recommendation is that the meeting frequency of the Transportation Advisory Committee would do something similar to the way the Parks Advisory Committee did. That they may need to meet more frequently. They may need to have subcommittees that are supplemented by people who are not on the committee.
The next meeting's the 20th.
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, can I just summarize what I think we heard? And I'll summarize this at the end of the meeting too, but since we have everybody here, Mr. Hurley suggested a work session specifically on Collard Lake Road. So I'm hearing agreement on that, but then I also heard the board desiring a separate later work session to talk more broadly about LAR. So work session on Collard Lake Road specifically that I think we would probably want to schedule sooner rather than later. Additional staff work, staff to conduct additional analysis on the LARs and then engage with the Transportation Advisory Committee to get their input, and then have a follow-up work session more broadly on the LARs and determining some policies, both in terms of how we handle what we have in the current queue as well as prospective policies, again, with the TRAC's input. Does that encompass everything that?
If I could add, and maybe with Collard, Orin suggested adding the Green Creek Bridge as an emergency work session as well.
So together, session on Green Creek Bridge and Collard Lake Road. Okay.
Yeah, and I would base Green Creek on the fact that right now it's a 7-ton rating, which limits emergency vehicle access. So.
Okay, any further comments, questions from commissioners? Any further comments, questions from staff? Okay, well, thank you so much. Sounds like we are concluding that with future assignments and work. Okay, so going back to the top of the page, we are.
I think we just have, I have a couple announcements, and I know Mr. Dingle has one announcement.
Okay, and then the commissioners were cut off by me at the point of the remonstrance, so I said we could have more of that. And also, we could have the commissioner announcements, business, and agenda team requests. So, Mr. Dingle, you can go first. Which item are we on, though?
This would be under county council announcements. This is really just closing out one of the assignments. We rushed there during the lunch hour. I sensed everybody wanted to get going. Very quickly, I believe it was Commissioner Bozevich wanted periodic updates on, you'll recall the issue involving the building inspection division and all of that. And so I have, for the benefit of the new members, the Division of Consumer and Business Services, I think is what their DCBS stands for. Last year, about this time, maybe a little bit earlier, came out with some rules that threw everything into turmoil in terms of saying that it was unconstitutional to use part-time or contract out for these building inspection services. And a lot of smaller communities don't have the volume to support a full-time building inspector, and so or building officials, so they contract out those services. That originally came out in the form of a letter advice that had been solicited by, I want to say Stan, that's not right, Mr. Long. Mark Long, who was the head of DCBS. And so a single attorney general issued a letter opinion in response to that offered that advice. There was a lot of controversy around it, a lot of complaining about it. And eventually, DCBS went back and requested a formal attorney general opinion. Now, for the difference is the letter opinion is something that's typically written by one assistant attorney general, probably run by their AIC attorney in charge. It doesn't have any binding effect. It's just an advice, like if I were to write a letter outlining my legal opinion on a matter. They requested a formal Attorney General opinion, and that involves a much more formalized process. In fact, with this Attorney General, it means that she will review it personally. It, once again, it's not binding, it doesn't have the force of law. Courts have generally found them to be persuasive. So DCBS requested the formal opinion, put their temporary rules that they had drafted up in place on hold, and that's where we were going. Somewhere, and part of the request from Commissioner Bozevich was that we provide input to that Assistant Attorney General about the opinion that was, formal opinion that was being drafted. Somewhere, I'm not sure where, Mr. Bovet told me that the governor came in and stepped in and swooped up and took the opinion and has pretty much said they're not interested in any input. So now the opinion, as I understand it, is being written for the governor's office, not DCBS.
Okay.
So that's where we are. Originally, we were promised, I believe, Commissioner Bozevich can correct me, I think that the Attorney General was indicating that they were going to have that opinion out in the fall, in October, November, and obviously it's not October, November.
Yeah. And just for the new members, one of the reasons this is such a concern is multiple small cities use contract building officials and contract building inspection. In fact, Bonita and Dune City, Junction City, are prime examples in my district. And this was going to cause a huge headache for some of those places because they just don't have enough permit volume to afford over $100,000 a year for a building official, which is what they're running right now. Secondary to that, the way the opinion was written it was written that the reason it was unconstitutional to use a third party was you were unconstitutionally delegating a discretionary authority. That opinion, if expanded, would mean we currently contract for hearings officials at a LMD. We contract for lots of things that have discretionary authority.
Physicians in our
Yeah.
clinics.
So you kind of, where does that end as far as that delegation of discretionary authority being unconstitutional? It was a very scary ruling because of where it could go in the future. Not just because in the middle of a housing crisis, it threw building permits into a turmoil in small communities. That was just, part of it. The secondary part was what's going to happen if this is really, determined to be the way, and we have to suddenly bring all sorts of things in-house that we just don't have capacity for, and there may not be ease of getting employees. So it was just a very scary letter of opinion, and that's why it's been something I've asked to have paid close attention to.
And one of the bad collateral effects was that it artificially drove up the cost of the building officials because people started in desperation trying to get people to go be building officials, and they drove up the cost. I mean, I heard in Polk County that the city of Dallas thought they had somebody, and then the city of Corvallis made an offer that was $20,000 a year more, and they lost them. So, but as soon as the opinion, I will commit to the board that as soon as the opinion comes out, I'll send it to you. We won't wait for an executive session. I'll make sure that you have it.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further before we go to the other items on my list? Okay, so at this time, we'll go back to remonstrance. And I know that not everybody finished their remonstrances this morning. Do any commissioners have any further remonstrance? Commissioner Buck.
It's been a little while, but we were initially talking about winter storm weather in the last few weeks. And I just wanted to give a thank you to a few folks that helped along the way, especially initially as we collectively got together and trying to figure out what our emergency management team is going to be working on. And So I wanted to give us a thank you to Governor Brown, and Heidi from her staff was very helpful in the state emergency management team as a whole. I think they were vital to helping us get the resources we need in pairing up with our emergency management team. I also wanted to thank June Chada from Senator Wyden's office and Dan Whalen from Congressman DeFazio's office. They were well-informed of the issues in the respective districts that kind of overlap to mine, as well as other parts of the county and other counties. In addition to those two, I wanted to say thank you to Senator Przansky and Representative Wilde, who are also keeping in touch and able to disseminate information to some constituents and be able to work with the state emergency management team. And a special thank you to ODOT and our public works and road crews for all the extremely hard work that they did to recover as fast as we did.
Okay, any other remonstrances? Seeing none, we will now move on to, by my count, we're down to commissioners' business. Any announcements from any commissioners?
I'm up again.
Go ahead.
Okay, we'll have Commissioner Bozievich, Commissioner Burney, and Commissioner Buck.
Okay, so quickly, I just, an opportunity to just say thanks to all the utility crews out there. I didn't, combine a little remonstrance with my announcement here, but I do want to announce, this event really makes folks aware of emergency preparedness. I mean, we're fortunate we're not in the Douglas Electric Co-op and spending 3 or 4 weeks without power. But there is a preparedness expo coming up on March 30th at 10 a.m. at the Florence Events Center for those folks west of the tunnel, where they will, actually be trying to help people with preparedness checklists, what you first things you ought to get, on your list, and working your way down the priority list as you have the capacity to purchase items, and how to be personally prepared. Because one of the things this really showed was you may be isolated. I have friends off of that famous Penn Road I just mentioned that's gravel that have a long driveway that had over 40 trees across. They didn't get out for days. So they had to depend on what they had in their house. And that's something I think we all need to be aware of and start preparing, because you also might be taking care of a neighbor, or maybe a neighbor's dogs, because they couldn't get back to town. Like, I'm sure Commissioner Sorensen, you might have been in Denver the same night my wife was. So that's the main thing I want to talk about in my announcements, is there is a preparedness expo on Saturday, March 30th at the Florence Events Center at 10 a.m.
A couple of comments. One is that it was the darndest thing, but when there is a climate event, I noticed people don't care if they live in your district or not, if they know you, that the staff here was exceptional. They don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat or a nonpartisan. All of a sudden, we're all in this together. And that was the one thing, one aspect of this that I found refreshing and grounding. We live in the same community, and we need to be pulled together, not pushed apart. Having said that, I would like to share the following. One, this board directed me to request a joint meeting and public hearing with LRAPA. I was at County College, the last LRAPA board meeting. LRAPA is having a board meeting this Thursday, and I will do that. Number two, FYI, the Metropolitan Planning Commission, which I'm on, supported the applications respectively of Sid Lyken and Carmen Four, each of whom are submitting applications for being on the Oregon Transportation Committee, statewide from Lane County. And I would like to share that I'm going to request yet another work session Mr. Mokrahysky, on Lane County Opportunity Zones. Opportunity zones are going to cut across the turfs of economic development that different communities have. In some ways, they are going to force a coherent one-stop approach to economic development, or at least force the opportunity of that. I have a map of where they are in Lane County. A CPA firm, Kernet Stokes, as a resident expert, and I think it's something this entire body ought to be aware of. And finally, I had a surprise visit from Mrs. Mokrahysky when I was judging the Oregon Battle of the Books Saturday morning at Thurston High School, the regionals, where 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade teams from across the county battled against one another to see who would represent the county at the state tournament. Those are my remarks. And she was a delight.
Thank you. Sorry, Commissioner Buck.
Just a few more things. I have two announcements and just wanted to briefly touch on a few things that I did, even though we didn't have meetings here. I was able to attend Health and Human Services event over at Valley River Inn with Dr. Vivek Murthy, the 19th Surgeon General. It was very well attended, and he's very well spoken. I was also able to go down to the Cottage Grove area and visit with their Youth Advisory Council, which I thought was very cool. These were kids that are very interested in how county government and city government works. I think it's the only one that we actually have in the county, and these are where they even have, student representatives that sit on their city council and get to do tours of the Capitol, and would love to host them here at the county one day. I was also able to meet with State Treasurer Tobias Reed and other elected officials here within the city, and got to talk to him a little bit more, and I appreciate his visit to our area. And the two announcements that I have is our lane track, or our Transportation Advisory Committee, does have yet another opening for District 5. So if anybody's interested in transportation issues and live in District 5, then please apply. I think it's open till the first week of April. And we do have a date for a community discussion on Sears Road, and that's April 8th at 6 p.m. at the Cottage Grove Community Center. So if you're interested in attending that Sears Road community discussion, please come. And then after that, we'll report back to the board.
Thank you. I'll just mention that for me, I wanted to let you know that I had attended the National Association of Counties Legislative Conference, and some of the highlights of that would be going to the county executives meeting with Mr. Mokrahysky and hearing about some of the challenges some of the other county administrators and county managers are having around the country. Another big highlight for me was I was in a tabletop discussion of how communities and counties could be involved in the 2020 census and what counties are already doing to prepare for that, and having the other participants, county commissioners from around the country, point out that their counties are already setting up complete count committees, are already looking at the benefits of having a complete count, and the reason being that many federal dollars are allocated based upon population. And so I think one takeaway from that was that we're kind of behind the communities that are already ahead of us, thinking, well, if we get our complete count committee going, we might have a better complete count, which is not the official census term, but I think that we're on the precipice of having a 6th congressional district in Oregon if we have a complete count. So I do think that that was very worthwhile. The bigger speeches, I guess Secretary Carson and Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue, they have a certain speaking style, and seeing them on sort of not really up close, but at a distance of 300 or 400 yards, they look a lot like the television version. And that wasn't, I didn't really learn much about that, but it was interesting and reminds you that, you know, people are people at every level. I enjoyed the other smaller gatherings I attended, and I just think that I had not attended that conference in several years, and I just want to recommend that as we begin our schedule for next year, that we usually have that as a down week. So think about commissioners that didn't attend this year, might want to attend, and I think it was really worthwhile. And then I wanted to mention, this is something that Commissioner Buck and I in particular are struggling with, but really the whole board is, and that is we've had these grueling meetings, and we're going to have another grueling meeting tomorrow, Homes for Good, the Board of Commissioners meeting tomorrow and in the morning. And so, you know, and you alluded to this, we each are very creative with the number of work sessions we want. So the agenda team's really struggling with how to accommodate this. And so what I might want to do, and not today, but I might want to do is get that list again to determine really how much we want to do this and whether or not we just want to get some reports. And I don't mean like really huge written reports, but more like, you know, 10-minute sessions to answer some of the major questions people want. Otherwise, I think you're going to be seeing more and more conflict. And I kind of joked at the beginning of the meeting that Commissioner Buck, you know, gets the credit for this efficiency of this meeting, but really, we've all added on things, and staff adds on things. And we have not, as the commissioners that head up the agenda team, we have not said, no, you can't have that. We've generally said yes. So I just want to let you know we're at kind of a breaking point, particularly with the legislature meeting and the budget all going on. So this is a tough period of months, and then you add on that we have a nice courthouse, just a few little things here and there. So now, are there any other announcements before we go into agenda team requests?
Commissioner Sorensen.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just a couple of things really quickly. Everybody's been thanking the hard work of folks, extra work during the snow emergency that we recently had. Wanted to point out that Ms. Winningham and Lance Englert and also Michael Finch went out of their way working one night to make certain that the KPNW got back on the air. KPNW, their towers are remote and they're out on Hideaway Hills Road, and they were simply off the air, which is significant because they are our LP1 station for the area. That is our main emergency transmitting station for the area. And the county crews went out of their way to make certain that KPNW got back in the air. So I'd like to thank them for that. And also point out very specifically to our men and women of Local 626 and of Admin Pro for working sometimes double time to make certain that people who were in the gravest danger and the greatest inconvenience were taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's go to item 9B, agenda team requests. Let's first go over the requests and work session requests, I guess. I had the idea of the post-budget and post-budget staff recovery from budget work session on the finance investment options. That was a result of our earlier thing. I have the, maybe a new item, and that is whether Public Works, at some point, I'm just going to throw out the term 8 months, whether Public Works can come back and tell us about the asset management work they're doing, and whether they can foresee a time when they add other county resources such as land, lots, fairgrounds, county buildings, and other things to their asset management.
Mr. Chair, pardon my interruption
Yeah,
for
go
just
ahead.
1 second.
Go ahead,
I'm on campus here in Ohio, and administration building is starting to close down. So I'm going to be moving from my current location to a different location. If you lose me briefly, I'm certain that I'll be able to get right back on.
Okay, and then we're just going to go into the AFSCME executive issue after that.
Thank you, at which point I will recuse. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Mokarski.
Do you want me to recap real quick?
Well, no, I want you to react to the asset management idea for a work session or for some kind of touch base.
The asset, okay, I didn't catch that one.
Okay, so the staff, it was approved to buy a very expensive computer system, and among the other questions that were asked is, what other resources, what other assets can be put in there? They seem to be really focused on bridges and roads, and that's what it's mainly for. But they said it was flexible and they could add other things, parks, maybe the fairgrounds, maybe public buildings and other assets, and that was more or less requested by Commissioner Buck. So I'm just saying, I think that would be a good idea.
I'm sorry, is that a work, do you want a work session on that, or
I
are you just
guess
asking
I'll
staff
say-
to look
Just
into
touch
that?
I guess I'll say at this time, I'm going to request a work session, but I'm also going to come back in a week or two and talk about how to pare back work sessions, and this might be one of them.
Yeah, and I think, I'd feel more comfortable if that was a request of staff to evaluate the potential use, so as an assignment, as
Okay.
opposed to having the board
Okay.
do a work session
Yeah.
on sort of an operational issue.
Okay, yeah,
So we certainly can make that an assignment, if you'd like, for us to
that's fine.
report. So, okay, so that's one that staff will evaluate the other potential uses of the asset management system and report
And the other
back.
one I had was more work on the fire and flood protection ordinance, and I believe that Keir said that they were coming back on the topic of fire, not on the topic of flood, but on the topic of fire.
Okay.
Okay, that's all I had.
Commissioner Burney also requested a work session on opportunity zones. The recap of the work session on Collard Lake Road and Green Creek Bridge, as well as having staff conduct additional analysis on LARs with a follow-up work session more broadly on LARs and input from the Transportation Advisory Committee. You already mentioned the follow-up on financial investment policies with a work session this summer. I think we talked about this summer having a work session on financial policies.
Investment policies.
Investment, right, financial investment policies, yeah. So that's everything I had. And then I did have, Mr. Chair, two updates on two existing that I was going to do under my announcements. Under existing assignments, if I can provide quick updates on that. The Commissioner Sorensen had requested a report back on the Comcast decision, and I made note of this last week, but you all were on the phone, so I'm not sure if you caught it as it relates to the courthouse, when we talked about the courthouse item, the dollar amount for that. The estimated amount from the Comcast settlement is $1.3 million to Lane County. Our plan is to have a proposal as part of the county administrator's proposed budget to the Budget Committee and the board that you will receive in late April, early May. And we're looking at recommending using those funds as part of the implementation plan for the shelter feasibility study, or the TAC report, as it's been referred to. So that's what we're evaluating right now, and that would come in the form of a recommendation as part of the budget, and then the Budget Committee could approve, deny, or adjust that. So that's that one. So I'm going to consider that report back on the Comcast item closed, because we'll have more discussion as part of the proposed budget. And then the other assignment was, that I wanted to update on was also Commissioner Sorensen's request for an item to brief the board on emergency services protocol. And we talked this, I just want to adjust this and say, well, I'd like to amend that one if it's all right, to advance it and say that that staff will be working on having an emergency management training for the Board of Commissioners and executive leadership and key staff sometime either as early as late April or potentially late May, early June. We'd like to target late April if it's possible, but if there are certain key people we can't have there as part of that. So those were the only two. So we'll update that second one on emergency management to be more specific to actually conducting a training with the board and executive leadership. Finally, Mr. Chair, if I can just make a comment, you referenced the census, and for Lane County, LCOG is the lead agency for the census, and so we have had some briefings from LCOG at the staff level. That's certainly something we can bring back and have more discussion, but Lane County, because it's a community-wide effort and it includes engaging with all of the rural cities, LCOG typically takes the lead on our census coordination work. That's it for me.
Okay, anything further on this topic from commissioners? Okay, seeing none, we are about to announce our executive session. Is there any other business that doesn't otherwise fit into all these other categories that commissioners would like to present? Seeing none, we are now ready to go to our executive session announcement, and that is item 10 on our agenda. And
Subsequent announcement, Mr. Chair, I would like to make an announcement myself. Thank you.
okay, go ahead, announce away.
Then I will announce at this point that due to a conflict of interest, I will recuse from the discussion of executive session. My son is a ASME employee.
Okay.
And I will return for the executive session tomorrow morning.
Very good. So we'll reserve our right to come out, but I doubt if we will. And so we'll hear you on the phone at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you very much. Okay, at this time, the Lane County Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session with to consult with counsel concerning the legal rights and remedies, legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602H, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out of executive session and into public session should the need arise. We'll be in recess and we'll start our executive session at, let's say 4:12 p.m. in the Board of Commissioners conference room. We are in recess.